Hello, this is John Frye, and this is my demo first real outing with Autodesk SketchBook Pro. I'm running this on a PC and a Cintiq 21 UX display that I've had for about 10 years. Um, and this is what the finished piece looks like. And my goal was to try to get out of this software the same kind of look that I've been getting out of Photoshop using my favorite brush pack and the tools that I'm familiar with there. And it only took me just a day to get kind of familiar with SketchBook Pro and get the look that I desired out of it. So it was actually pretty cool to see that this piece of software really pretty much does everything I need it to do. I started a lot of my drawings on paper, and then I can scan them in or photograph them and import them as a multiply layer. And that allows me to float the line drawing on top of all the color work that I do. This also kind of helps enforce kind of the analog kind of natural feeling to the finished image as well. So some of that line work that's done in pencil or pen will be retained in the final image. And it just adds a little bit of texture and humanity to it, I think. Layer formatting, you can do multiply layer, screen, darken, kind of all the different formats we're familiar with in Photoshop. And the organization is really similar. Nice thing, we have a little bit of a value or a opacity slider tool within that. As you kind of work with the software, you'll see all sorts of neat little interface tricks that make this so slick. Autodesk is really good with that stuff. So basically I'm just blocking in the color first, the medium color, and then I work in both directions. I work to bright and then I work to dark around that, but I always start with the medium. And where the sun is hitting gets a little bit of a more greenish, warmer tone as I go brighter, and focus that kind of brightest part of that in the focal point of the front fender. Usually the front nearest part of the vehicle ends up being the focal point where I have the greatest contrast and the values and the most saturation in that area. So I'll focus a lot of my energy and time on that particular area, and then I'll kind of vignette the time spent and the detail towards the other parts of the car. I'm getting the horizon line blocked in there as well pretty quick. Sometimes I'll comp this out. With this one I just went straight into it. You'll see the horizon, that's everything, that kind of horizontal line that goes through the car. Everything below that I'm starting to add a little bit of a warmer, more neutral tone. On the color picker it's actually it's still blue, but as a contrast to the other blues in the car it looks really warm. And that just kind of reinforces that that surface is reflecting the ground and the earth, and it gives it a little bit more form. After the body's blocked in, I get pretty quickly into doing the wheels and the tires. Again, the front tire, this is the focal point area of the car. It's really important to spend a lot of time and get this really nicely done in terms of tightness, detail, accuracy. Because your eye is going to go there very quickly when you look at this image at the beginning. The contrast with the black shadowed area and then the brightness of the highlighted body paint around there, it really draws your eye. So as opposed to like just cutting and pasting something off the internet, it's really important to maintain the same quality, textural, style of the image that you're creating for the body and all the rest of the details of it. So hand drawing it is not always the fastest way, but it definitely looks the best, and it looks right. The tire tone, I start with a neutral, and you'll see that I'll start to add some warmth to it. It'll actually go both ways. So in the highlight, I'll bring in a little bit of a bluish color. The ellipse tool in here, it's a little bit different from Photoshop because you're drawing from the center out. Photoshop, you're drawing from the upper corner or the corner of the ellipse and stretching it out that way. So that takes a little bit of learning, getting used to. And when I draw these, I'll tend to start out with a vertical axis, and then I'll rotate the image of the wheel to fit the car later, just because the stroke ends up being a little bit better. Drawing all the sipes and the tread on here is often a challenge. But again, if you do it by hand, it'll look right, it'll match. You can rotate the canvas to get your natural kind of stroke in there. These lines that I've sketched for the sipe or the tread of the car, I'm actually doing by hand. And there's a tool called Steady Stroke, which cleans up a line that you've just drawn with your hand, and you can actually draw like perfect ellipses. It'll kind of see what you intended to do, and it'll straighten and smooth things out a little bit. So I've drawn one of these sipes, and then I've duplicated that layer and copied it over a bunch of times, and I'm just hand drawing all these diagonal ones in between. But yeah, the Steady Stroke tool is kind of one of the most unique and kind of almost superhero tools to this software, especially when you're drawing product stuff and automotive stuff, where there's really kind of tight, clean lines. You can really get really nice lines out of this, arcs and curves and stuff, and you can get them to be exactly how you want them to be. So it's almost like a magical tool, so it's pretty genius. So here again, as I was saying, I'm adding a little bit of sky tone to the highlighted areas on this. As I was learning this, I really kind of didn't know what brushes would work best for me as well. So you'll see in that Frye work set of brushes, I have about 10, 12 different brushes. 3 of them are default brushes that come with the software, and then the rest are ones that I've either created or I've gotten online from Autodesk community. And in terms of brushes, I really don't use a whole lot of different ones. I kind of stick with a bare bones style of kind of image creation, and it feels a little bit more natural to me that way. And I think overall the image, it'll tend to look like it's created by kind of one hand that way as well. So you won't see the pattern of a brush as easily, and everything seems to blend together a little bit better. Working with the wheel, this is like a stamped steel or pressed steel wheel style, so have these concentric rings that have a little bit of depth to them, reflecting either sky tone or bouncing off the ground for a neutral tone. Just adjusting the brightness and the contrast of that, so it looks like kind of a painted, glossy, but not super glossy wheel. There's a little bit of a hub center that I sketched in there, a little bit of a cylinder, and I'm just copying that over and using that as bolts that go in there, and then going back in there and adjusting the brightness and the contrast a little bit. So again, the whole process of drawing wheels does take a lot of time overall in the image, but it's time well spent, and it's really essential. The relationship between the wheel and the tire itself is something you really want to study and be careful about. It'll make the difference on how that wheel is set into the rubber, how deep it is from front view and from angle view, to make it look like it's realistic. So I can do this pretty well off the top of my head without any reference now, emulating different styles as a 1960s or 50s looking wheel and tire setup, or like something that's more modern where it's a really thin profile tire and the wheel's a very large diameter. So just little bits of tuning going on through here, and then we get into the chrome. We start to do the chrome. It's a lot of fun because the drawing starts to really come to life. We already have quite a bit of contrast from the neutral and dark tire wheel well area to the body, and the chrome is really, really lively, even in contrast to the shiny blue body. So we're throwing in first just some medium neutral tone, just like we did with the body paints. We're starting with a medium value, then we work in darker and lighter from there. I throw in this yellowish ground tone first. So basically anything that's facing slightly downward gets this tone, and then everything that's facing upward, I'm adding this white or lighter value. And what I want to do is be very sparing with the application of like pure white to this image. So I'm trying to keep the brightest white for the kind of really impactful highlight sun reflection areas. So I'll just back away off of the white generally, except for those little bit of highlight areas. So again, upward facing surfaces are going to be sky tone, downward is going to be ground tone. And the complexity beyond that, as we get towards the zenith of the sky, everything gets a little bit more purplish, a little bit darker, and then we have that haze towards the horizon, where everything gets a little bit greener, a little bit more neutral, and also a little bit lighter in value. I'm just kind of messing around here with a little bit of glaze on the glass itself. So this is just kind of what the headlight would look like without any lens on it first. Getting that separation between the body tone with a dark paint line and the chrome itself is really important, so it doesn't look like it's suddenly just painted silver on top of that body color. So you can really see how this thing was manufactured. And also just on that edge, where the headlight affixes to the body, there's this little bead of metal where the metal is turned over, and it's actually this extruded cylindrical shape that's really, really small. And so that cylinder, just like if you ever taken Viscom class at art school, a cylinder will stretch things out vertically. So it's stretching out the highlight of the sun along that edge. I've adjusted the values a little bit. My Cintiq is actually a little bit light, and so I tend to work light anyway, so sometimes I'll just adjust the values of the whole image. So you see this thing got a little bit more contrasty. Cut and paste, one of the magical digital tools, getting the other headlight over there. And of course, as we copy an ellipse to be farther away from us with perspective, it got a little bit narrower. Just like we did with the edge of the body behind the headlight, where we have door cuts, that door cut is actually also an extruded cylindrical shape. So the horizon, as it hits it, it bends a little bit. The bright part of the sky, as it hits it, also stretches out. I kind of had an idea to have like a turn signal blinker on top of the headlight, and messing around with an overlay tool to get an amber color on top of this, and then taking that same headlight bezel and stretching it out. So using the manipulate tools is a really nice kind of four-sided box tool to stretch things out. So all that work I've done to capture the different tones of the chrome, I've just recycled them here and then blended them together. So a little bit of light reflecting off the amber back into the bezel of the headlight, adjusting the shape here, and also a little bit of reflection that goes into the body from that thing that's on top of the headlight. Other metal areas of the body, so I have this whole rocker panel that's metal. Because it's generally facing straight down, it's going to be reflecting all that kind of warm earth tone under there, but I wanted to have a little bit of an interest of something reflecting in there. So sometimes the cylindrical shape in a rocker will reflect ground shadows coming off the tire. So I'm just ghosting one of those towards the rear tire, and I mess around with that a little bit. Again, there's one of those transitions from the inside of the wheel well to the rocker itself, where we have a value change, and that metal is bending over. So at that bend, it's another cylindrical shape. So it's stretching that bright value in a little bit of an arch vertically there. Where we have large areas, I usually try to make some sort of transition in value or tone. So that rocker is facing downward, but I don't have the same tone along the whole thing. So I have a little bit of gradation on there, and that's probably one of the few places I use an airbrush in this image. I sometimes use a little bit just to soften things out a little bit if it's a little bit too textural. The body side of this car is a really kind of a long, stretched out shape, so adding some details like graphics and the cut lines for the door, kind of essential to kind of breaking that up. And of course, I'm not putting it smack dab in the middle of the body side as well. It's got a little bit of a skew towards the front. You know, avoiding too much symmetry, too much predictability always adds interest to the car. I'm using the pixel layer lock functionality, which is something that Photoshop has as well. So as I drew that ellipse, I was able to lock the pixels that were drawn on there. So as I draw anything on top of that layer, none of the ink or the paint that I apply will go beyond that ellipse shape. So it's a really nice, easy way of masking things really quickly. The number that I created is a reference to a Cunningham Le Mans car from the 1950s that the French called the Monster, and it had this really unusual number letter form on the side, which kind of looked like a mix between a 9 and a 2. Again, you know, during that era, that was probably hand painted on there, so there's no sense of me trying to find a font that matches and building that on there. Just drawing it by hand is probably the best way to kind of get that same feeling of something that's been hand done. And then, you know, the purity of that black, I'm, you know, roughing that up a little bit with some side gray tone. Chrome trim can be pretty difficult because you have to draw parallel lines that curve and arc. The predictive stroke tool is really nice because it'll give you that really smooth curve. And so that you don't have to worry about. And basically I'll just draw one curve and I'll copy it over, then fill in between it. And I'm grabbing the sky tone and the ground tone from the headlight bezel I've already drawn. So it's in that same palette of colors for the chrome that we used before. What's really important to do to make that chrome look realistic, as if it's setting in the body on top of it, having that little bit of division, is to make a duplicate of the curve that's black on either side. So you see that separation, a little bit of a cut line between the two. When you get to the glass, this is something again where you want to start with a medium tone, and that medium tone is showing where the glass is completely transparent. There's a little bit of tint on it. And then I start to obstruct the view through the glass, where the seat is, where the instrument panel is, rear view mirror, any structure, roll bar that's in there, and catching a little bit of light on some of the items inside, like the top of the instrument panel and on the seat there. But because it's an illustration of the exterior of the car, I really don't want to overdo that drawing of the interior. There I am using the predictive stroke to draw that ellipse for the steering wheel, erase away where I don't need it. And then once you have that, you start to apply glaze and glare on top of the glass. So on the far side of the car, there's going to be a little bit of a sky tone. On the near side, it's a little bit of a warm kind of sun yellowish tone. And then where the sun is actually hitting, there's a really bright white highlight. The side glass gets that same horizon reflection that's running through behind the glass itself. So you see that horizontal line of complete transparency, and then above that, a little bit of glare. The rear wheel we're treating just like the front wheel in terms of that depth. So wherever there's kind of a upward facing surface, it gets a little bit of a bluish gray lighter tone, and then downward facing surfaces get that warm tone. So I'm using the Alt button to select colors that and values that I already have in the front wheel, and then transferring those over and painting them on the back. Because it's actually a truncated conical shape, the tones and values that I'm applying to it, they all kind of converge towards the center of the wheel. So this is kind of Viscom, 101, the basics of art when you had to take those classes and sketch the cylinders and cubes and cones and stuff. This is where all that learning comes back to you. So a lot of the shapes that are on a car, like the body side of a car, they're really just cylinders that have been stretched out and squished a little bit. And so the same kind of logic applies. And really, I'm always thinking about what direction is this surface facing, and where's the sun, and is this being in shadow from something else? And it's really just a logical kind of way of doing things. So I'm sketching a cylinder on the side. This is kind of a constructivist way of doing things. I'm not sketching on the image all the time. Sometimes I'll sketch away from it and cut and paste and kind of add things. So this is the model constructive way of doing things. So I use that same cylinder, and then I'm making a wheel nut version. Same tone, sky tone, bright, ground tone in a hexagonal kind of shape, and then cutting and pasting these and throwing them into the middle of the wheel. Copy paste, the magic of copy paste. It's always nice to have. And then erasing away where they're either obstructed or they're in shadow. The whole kind of front fascia of this car has a lot of chrome on it. So when you're doing chrome, you really have to turn your logical brain on and always be thinking about the color coming from the direction that it's facing. So you're thinking in 3 dimensions, the cylindrical shape where the headlight is sticking out, the surfaces that face up are going to be sky tone, facing straight sideways is going to be horizon, and below that it's going to be ground tone. And then we get into these areas like the horizontal bars that go through here. If they're tilted a little bit to one side or the other, the tone's going to be changing. We have this vertical structure that's connecting the two, that's reflecting into the top surface of that bar. We have some cylindrical transition fillets between the vertical surfaces and the horizontal surfaces, and they carry that highlight through there. They're under an overhang, so it's generally a pretty dark color. My general advice for chrome is to draw things pretty neutral. Look at reference from photos that haven't been retouched. The tendency is often to make the blues and the warm tone too saturated, but usually making them pretty neutral looks a lot more realistic. I'm flattening the whole image, and I'm duplicating it down and making a neutral kind of tone underneath. And this I use to get a little bit more of a contrast between the upward facing surfaces of the paint and everything that's facing down. So what I'm doing right now is I'm erasing away everything that's below the horizon line, so it gets a little bit of an oilier, earthier tone below there. So you see I've condensed everything down to 3 layers, and then I flatten that down to 2 when I'm done. So this layer pass, and this is all kind of final adjustment stuff that I tend to do. It's a little bit of a Fresnel kind of pass. So as the surfaces roll away towards the back of the car, I'm seeing a little bit less paint color. I'm seeing a little bit more reflection. So I kind of brighten those surfaces up back there a little bit. It also helps to focus the greatest contrast and saturation towards the front of the car. So as this thing rolls back, you see the back of that rear fender gets really light and a little bit hazy. And that's just, making sure that we're focused on the front and we have that feeling of depth. And then just towards the end here is the kind of the fun part of adding this giant wing on there. So again, like I did with the bolts on the rear wheel, I'm drawing this as a separate unit, and I'm just going to kind of kit bash it onto there. So I have this kind of B24 tail stabilizer shape that I'm drawing in flat plane, and then I'm manipulating into perspective on the side. And then keeping these as separate layers, I can copy the one on the other side, and then the horizontal bar that goes in between them will be a layer that's under the near one but above the far one. So as I draw that, and I'm just roughing in the perspective, making sure that I'm got some guidance in terms of how it's going to lay out. And I'm getting to that point where I'm starting to just kind of clean things up and see where I stand in terms of definition. I have this mid-engine setup, so it has a roof scoop like a mid-90s Group C car would. So horizontal stabilizer, so it's got a little bit of an inverted wing section, a downforce wing, and then the cast shadow that goes on that, using a multiply layer functionality so I can see what's happening underneath. And then as that horizontal piece rests up against that far vertical stabilizer, there's going to be a reflection on there. The leading edge of that, I'm softening that up so it looks a little bit more aerodynamic. Those little bit of kisses of light that come through there, so you see a little bit of white that I've added on those horizontal or those vertical stabilizers. Just that little bit of detail, catches your eye a little bit. Doing the same thing with this structure that's supporting this as well. A little bit of the lightning hole where the white is coming through there. So the nice thing about doing this model kit box style is you have a really contrasty background that doesn't distract at all. So just like an old Tamiya or Revell kit, it's a really good way to focus on the vehicle itself. And because I'm such a vehicle nut, I like a really nicely rendered background, but sometimes I'm just really focused on getting the vehicle itself done. So that's what's important. And there's the horizontal wing reflection in that vertical area. I have a little bit of a split, what they call like a wind split, going through the surface of this car. So on the hood, you see that quick change between the values. So we have that Fresnel effect on the super glossy far side of the hood. It's really light, kind of sky tone over there. And that effect will also happen in the roof. Right now it's kind of just roughed in there, so you see a little bit of a dark to light transition that runs through the center line. The glass of the greenhouse, the front windshield, reflects into the hood, so you see that dark reflection. Kind of all the areas where the car reflects into itself, it adds a lot of character. For this style, there are several artists that you can kind of look at for reference. Jack Lanewood, Fitz and Van. If you type in Fitz and Van, Pontiac, they did advertising art. And also Roy Huxley, who did model kits in England, 60s and 70s. All really good stuff to look at. So this is what the finished piece looks like. There's a little bit of touch-up that happened right after that last clip, or added some color on the rear wing, and also adjusted the tones a little bit. I have some little red lines for the jack points down there on the rocker, and finished up with little wing stays, little tension wires on there. Thanks for watching the video, and I would definitely recommend giving SketchBook Pro a try. It's a great piece of software, and it's pretty quick to pick up. And you can do super clean product design stuff, and you can also do some of this rougher, more analog looking illustration. Thank you.